Hi, very sorry. The Wi-Fi went off here. This sometimes happens. So I'm using somebody's phone. Hopefully this will last. If there's another problem, we'll find a new solution. Usually things are pretty good here, but not always. So
Should I ask
hopefully
you
it
to hear us?
continues.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So coming back to the presentation, we were talking about whether the mind, for example, thinking tomorrow, I wish it wasn't so hot, right? That's what we call a wishing or an imaginative mind. So it doesn't have to realize its object, perhaps, in the same way that a mind thinking, for example, sound is impermanent, is analytical and realizes its object. So is there a question of is it right or wrong to think I wish it was not so hot tomorrow? Can that be a wrong consciousness? It doesn't matter whether it's hot or not. Even if it's hot again, it doesn't mean that I was wrong to wish it wasn't hot. So as I mentioned last time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said that in his opinion, Bodhicitta and other method minds like compassion and so forth are not actually any of the 7 types of minds that are presented in the minds in awareness, Lodik. Nevertheless, in Sera Je, we have to defend our position within their textbooks. That's kind of the style of debate. Doesn't imply that you have to believe it, but when you're debating, you try to, as best as possible, fit your answers into the system that's presented in the textbook and as a way of setting a kind of parameter. Otherwise, you can kind of say whatever you want. And so as part of in some sense, a game, we have to accept that. Nevertheless, it's something to think about. Is it true? Is bodhicitta a realizing mind? So here we have to say that it is. So it realizes I must achieve that. And what that means, it can be a bit hard to define. Can you be wrong about such a thing? But anyway, that's what we end up deciding. So therefore, it doesn't have to realize emptiness to think I want to achieve the nature body of a Buddha. That particular mind does not have to realize the nature body of the Buddha. And I think there actually is something meaningful to that. For example, when we're analyzing and thinking about what is enlightenment, it's very different from wishing to achieve enlightenment. Of course, the stronger we have an understanding that enlightenment is a real thing, then the more sincere the wish is going to be. Nevertheless, it doesn't have to be that it's at the time of thinking, I wish I could achieve enlightenment. We don't necessarily have the same level of critical analysis that we do when we actually analyze what is enlightenment. We have in some sense, two different approaches to it. Sort of like the idea that when we're doing prayers, we sincerely accept these ideas. I wish all beings were enlightened, and I wish I could stay in existence until the cyclic existence lasts and liberate all beings. Then when we actually ask questions, we're very critical in our approach and say, is such a thing possible? Is there really such a thing as reincarnation? And within reincarnation, is it possible to develop the mind infinitely? We have to step back and question in a much more critical way. Otherwise, it remains a mere kind of faith, and that's not what we want when we're using analysis. So there's some differentiation here. But when we're actually meditating on bodhicitta and trying to enhance our wish, we don't necessarily have to have that same level of analysis all the time. Otherwise, it can actually become a kind of obstacle to the imaginative meditation that we're doing. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So this is a related question. Must bodhicitta observe the 4 bodies? So we just said that bodhicitta, for example, could be observing the nature body of the Buddha. But what if bodhicitta, for example, just observed the form body of the Buddha and thought, I'd wish to achieve that? Not that necessarily all bodhicitta is like that, but in a particular person. A particular person might even not believe that there's such a thing as a nature body. For that example, that person might not accept emptiness. Can they still have bodhicitta that observes whatever number of bodies they accept? Or could somebody that even understands that there are 4 different bodies have different minds. One mind that wishes to achieve the nature body, one mind that wishes to achieve the wisdom body, one mind that wishes to achieve the form body, and so forth. So I have a couple of quotations here. One, this is from Tsongkhapa in the Great Stages of the Mantric Path, actually, towards the beginning of the text. He says that the form body is the main body to attain, because what we really want is to be able to benefit others. So we say, for the benefit of all sentient beings, may I attain enlightenment. What's really going to directly benefit others is the form body. But we need the wisdom body in order to have the form body function. So it says the wisdom body is attained as a corollary like wanting water and grabbing a cup. So what you really want is water, but what you have to do is pick up a cup. So likewise, what you really want is the form body to benefit beings, but to actualize that, you have to have the wisdom body and the nature body. Still, it doesn't make it clear whether one particular mind has to think of both at the same time. But another quotation here is from Chandrakirti, which is a bit poetic, as you'll see. It's a little bit obscure, but the general accepted meaning here is that he's talking about the four bodies. So he's defining bodhicitta as something which wishes to achieve the four bodies. So it says, the cause giving rise to the excellent taste of nectar that is holy dharma. So that's talking about the complete enjoyment body, because that is what every moment speaks, this pure dharma, the pure Mahayana dharma. And then the characteristic of turning away from all erroneous conceptions, that's talking about the nature body, because the truth of cessation, or the nirvana in the mind continuum of a Buddha, that is a kind of nature body. And then it said that it's also implicitly describing the wisdom body. And then the nature of being a friend to all migrators, that's talking about the nirmanakaya, the emanation body that appears directly to all sentient beings in accordance with their capacity, whereas the sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, only appears to Arya Bodhisattvas. So he lists all four bodies, and he says, wanting to achieve the state of such a Buddha. That's in the context of describing what is bodhicitta in the opening verses of his text, the entering the middle way. So this is from the auto commentary on that, where he describes the four bodies. So it's understood that it does seem to be saying that that bodhicitta is a wish to achieve all four bodies. But then there's these questions. For example, the non-madhyamaka bodhisattva does not realize emptiness. That's tautological for the madhyamaka system. If somebody is not a madhyamaka, does not accept the middle way view, they can't possibly realize emptiness. So they can't realize the nature or the wisdom body. Nature body, because that's emptiness, and the wisdom body, because it's not possible to understand the mind cognizing emptiness without understanding emptiness. And furthermore, to actually understand the wisdom body, one has to realize that the abandonment of the knowledge obscurations, or the cognitive obscurations. And the knowledge obscurations come about through grasping at true existence. So one has to realize that it's possible to abandon the grasping at true existence. To do that, one has to realize emptiness and realize that the conception of true existence is an incorrect conception, and therefore is suitable to be abandoned. So a non-madhyamaka cannot realize the nature or the wisdom body. So what would we say? Is there such a thing as a non-madhyamaka who is a bodhisattva? Generally, it's accepted that one can be. There are, for example, in the Prajnaparamita Sutra itself, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, it talks about bodhisattvas who have a lot of obstacles because they have not cognized emptiness yet. But it does then imply that there are bodhisattvas who haven't realized emptiness. And so then even furthermore, what about a Vaibhashika? So the lowest school of Buddhist tenets, if there's such a bodhisattva, they do not even accept the exalted knower of all aspects, the Namkyan. The reason for this is that in the Vaibhashika system, there's no such thing as an aspect, Nampa. Some of you might know this, that in the Vaibhashika system, for example, the I consciousness accesses its object, we say nakedly, meaning that it's It's simply that whatever is external just appears directly to the eye sense power, and that is then appearing to consciousness. Whereas in the Dharmakirti system, which is the basis for the Sautantrika system, the eye sense power acts as a kind of prism that then the external object is reflected in there. And so there's an appearance like in a mirror. That's the aspect. And the consciousness is then generated in the aspect of what it's cognizing. So therefore, it's not actually meeting with the external object. And in this sense, there are these aspects which then is taken to extend to all consciousnesses, how they observe their objects. And so things, for example, thought consciousness has an aspect of an appearance of a particular thing. So we can generate that aspect much more easily than we can with an eye consciousness, because it does not require the thing being there in front of us. We can imaginatively generate any aspect we wish. And then, for example, a direct perception that is a clairvoyance. So if somebody sees a very far away object, it's not that they're actually accessing that object directly, but that an aspect of that object is reflected in their consciousness. So nowadays, a good example of this is like a television screen. We look at a TV, and we can say, I see directly something that's happening thousands of miles away, but it's not that I'm actually accessing that object. It's simply that it's being presented to me on the TV screen. So this is understood. That's how the Buddha has an omniscient consciousness. It's not that the Buddha's mind literally takes the nature of all objects. Otherwise, what's considered the extreme consequence of that is that the Buddha would be one continuum with all sentient beings. And then when the Buddha, for example, experienced the fires of hell, the experience would be just the same as it is for a hell being, and the Buddha would be suffering. But it's as though all aspects, so that's why it's called the exalted knower of all aspects, the Namkyan, that all aspects appear at once. So there is a complete omniscience. So the Vaibhashika does not even accept the idea of an aspect, much less the idea that there is an omniscient consciousness that can simultaneously perceive all aspects. So then a Vaibhashika Bodhisattva thereby wouldn't have any sense, I want to achieve the exalted knower of all aspects. So at least for the Madhyamaka, that is what is the nature body is by definition the exalted knower of all aspects, or the wisdom body. And so a Vaibhashika Bodhisattva can't really understand what the wisdom body is, much less wish to achieve it. So we might say that a Bodhicitta could observe just one or two bodies. So the Vaibhashika Bodhisattva, they don't actually understand what the Buddha is, but they do have an idea that there's somebody who's abandoned knowledge obscuration. So there's somebody that's meditated on the Four Noble Truths in a much deeper way than a Hinayana practitioner, and has abandoned the knowledge obscurations. Although they don't understand exactly how that happens, there's no particular reason why they couldn't think, I wish to achieve that state. This would, by definition, be what we call a dull faculty practitioner, because they have a pledge to achieve something, or an acceptance of something as existing, when they haven't actually verified its existence. There's no way they can if they haven't realized it. Nevertheless, they could just have a wish. I wish I could achieve such a state. It's very possible to realize. It's easy to imagine how such a thing could happen. This actually happens all the time. People might think I'd like to achieve this or that without really understanding if it's possible. So in that case, maybe they just see the body of the Buddha. They see Shakyamuni Buddha and think I'd like to be like him. And that is a Buddha body. The Shakyamuni Buddha is an emanation body. But then we have consequences of this acceptance. If we say that a bodhicitta can only observe just one body at a time, then can a single person have two bodhicittas? So a Madhyamaka bodhisattva who understands the four bodies, can that person think, for the sake of all sentient beings, may I achieve the nature body? For the sake of all sentient beings, may I achieve the form body? For the sake of all sentient beings, may I achieve the wisdom body? and have three different minds that are functioning. And therefore, that person doesn't just have bodhicitta, they have bodhicittas, plural. And if that's the case, then an even further consequence would be, can that person simultaneously have both aspiring and engaging bodhicitta? Now, the reason for this is that in our system, as we'll talk about actually in a few minutes, there's the idea that a person can have what's called both active and dormant consciousnesses. So a person can have two mental consciousnesses functioning at once. So one of them is active, one of them is manifest in consciousness, and one of them is dormant in the sense we might say in modern terms like subconscious, but it's still a functioning mind. It's just not that they're not actively thinking about it at that moment. So generally it's understood that when bodhicitta is active in consciousness in the continuum of a person who's already taken bodhisattva vows, then that is engaging bodhicitta. Whereas when it's dormant, for example, when that person is meditating on emptiness, then that's aspiring bodhicitta. But what if somebody has two different bodhicittas, then when they're actively thinking, I wish I could achieve the nature body, and then that mind thinking, I wish to achieve the form body, is dormant. So then the wish to achieve the nature body is engaging bodhicitta. The wish to achieve the form body is aspiring bodhicitta at that moment. So therefore, the person simultaneously has both aspiring and engaging bodhicitta. Now, perhaps that's the case. There's not any particular reason that we have to say that's impossible. We'd have to, as often we do, creatively change the meaning, perhaps, of certain quotations. For example, in Shantideva's text, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, in the first chapter, he says, when somebody has engaging bodhicitta, then the merit that they're accumulating every moment is so much more powerful than the merit of merely having aspiring bodhicitta. But here we're talking about a person who has both. So we'd have to say, well, maybe his quotation means when they have only aspiring bodhicitta. So we could say that, but then of course we have to start manipulating the meanings of various quotations. So you can see that no matter what we accept, there are going to be problems. Personally, when I was in debate, my answer was that that basically, if a person doesn't have to observe all four bodies, for example, the Vaibhashika Bodhisattva does not have to observe all four bodies, they don't accept them. But they have to, when they have bodhicitta, they have the wish to achieve whatever bodies they accept. And I think there's something practical about that too. When we think, I wish to achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings, we don't really have to think, I wish I could achieve both the form body and the nature body and the wisdom body for all sentient beings. It's just enlightenment, the generality of enlightenment. Then when we analyze, we might pick it apart and say, what is enlightenment? So whatever we understand to be enlightenment at the time of bodhicitta, we're thinking, I wish I could achieve that. Now, when that Vaibhashika Bodhisattva later generates the understanding of the nature body and of the wisdom body, then their bodhicitta also undergoes a transformation. It's wishing for something more substantial of all four bodies. Nevertheless, when I accepted it in a debate, of course, some of the people were heckling me quite a lot. I remember this is when we went to the Abhidharma class, which is the final class of the regular course of study at Sera, and they were debating me on this point. So they can get very critical, bring up very subtle points about what is the consequence of saying that. So one of the things they said is, well, then, if that person first has the wish to achieve just the form body, and that's bodhicitta, later when they wish to achieve the wisdom body, when they understand what that is, the first moment of that is still going to be a contrived consciousness. So it can't be the same thing as the wish to achieve the form body, which is already uncontrived because it's bodhicitta. So then later, do those two minds become one? Do two different streams of consciousness merge into a single stream of consciousness? Then there's also conceptual problems with that. Now, he asked me, posit an example of two streams of consciousness becoming a single stream. So my answer was, well, the the Nyamsha Geshe, which is meditative equipoise, the wisdom of meditative equipoise, and then the subsequent attainment after meditative equipoise. In the body of a Buddha, those are considered to be one consciousness and not two. So for a sentient being, they're one. For a Buddha, for a sentient being, they're two substantially different consciousnesses. For a Buddha, they are one. So does that mean that two different minds become substantially one later on? What does that even mean? Is a mind like a river? Do you have two different rivers that can merge into one? Is that even a good analogy for how consciousness functions? We'll get that again a little later when we talk about minds functioning simultaneously. So I think maybe I've raised more issues here than I've resolved, but I hope it shows how complex some of these questions are, and they relate not just to bodhicitta itself, but to ordinary psychology about how do different minds relate to each other. What does it even mean to have two minds in somebody's continuum? Okay, so now the question of when we say for the sake of all sentient beings, or really for the sake of others, in the Abhisamaya Lamkara, the verse says, bodhicitta is the wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of others. So what does it mean for the sake of others, or others' purpose? So I have not the observed object, but the purposive object, others' purpose. So when I say bodhicitta is the wish, that bodhicitta observes the purpose of others and wishes to achieve enlightenment for that purpose. What is bodhicitta actually observing? I think we might have talked about this last time, that the real object that it wishes to achieve is enlightenment. Others' purpose is not actually the observed object of bodhicitta, although it does say that explicitly in Jetsun Shoki Gyaltsen's textbook, that it has two observed objects, others' purpose and enlightenment. Nevertheless, we generally understand that when he says others' purpose is the observed object, it doesn't mean that in a literal sense. Like we usually have, for example, when you observe sound and you think that it's impermanent, then sound is the observed object. What it means is that it's the purposive object, meaning for the purpose of this, I will generate this wish for enlightenment. But that's a separate mind. That's really great compassion when you're thinking for the purpose of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free from suffering. Then you think, may I achieve enlightenment. So they're two different minds. Bodhicitta itself does not actually think for the sake of all sentient beings. Otherwise, it would have two different engaged objects, and one mind can't do that. But then what does it mean, others' purpose? For the sake of all sentient beings, does it just generally mean that all sentient beings may be enlightened? Or can it mean very specific things, like may the hungry find food, may the poor find wealth, and so forth? So there's a quotation in the sutra. Some of you, if you're reading Jetsun Shoki Gyaltsen's text, he's quoting from Haribhadra, the Indian commentary on Abhisamaya Lamkara, where Haribhadra is quoting from the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. And he's giving the source for the observed object as others' purpose. So there's the two observed objects, as I mentioned before, that's not literal, but here anyway, he says the two observed objects, the object of others' purpose and the object of enlightenment. And Haribhadra gives the quotations from the sutra that describe those as the object. So when he gives the quotation from the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra for others' purpose, it actually lists a number of different things. It lists basically the 6 perfections, and that placing beings in those 6. So it doesn't just say placing all unenlightened beings in enlightenment. It says placing the miserly in generosity, placing the corrupt in ethics, placing the angry in patience, the lazy in effort, the distracted in concentration, the foolish in wisdom. So is it thereby saying that bodhicitta, that when the mind that not bodhicitta itself, but the one that precedes it, that thinks for the sake of all sentient beings, is it thinking these very specific things? Or is it they're just saying, these are all parts of one whole, and it's giving examples working according to the need of each one. So I'll give sentient beings whatever they need. and thereby it's simply thinking one thing at a time, as opposed to going over all of these details. Now, one way we could also say it is that here, when it says generosity, it's not just saying generosity in a general sense. It's talking about the perfection of generosity, which is actually a Buddha's mind. One does not perfect generosity until one is a Buddha. So really, it's saying, I'll put the miserly in enlightenment, the corrupt in enlightenment, the angry in enlightenment. But it's saying different aspects of enlightenment that are suitable or that are congruent with whatever affliction is strongest in that particular person. And then what about realizing emptiness? So the reason I put this here, later when you study Madhyamaka, when you read Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's general meaning of Madhyamaka, there's a big discussion of Bodhicitta there too, in the context of the first chapter of entering the middle way. So there, Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen says, says, well, may I realize emptiness such that I can help all sentient beings to realize emptiness. They think that's bodhicitta. And Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen says, no, because that, although it does observe the other's purpose, it doesn't observe enlightenment. So then it would imply that merely realizing emptiness is other's purpose in this context, and it's not simply enlightenment. Now, in the Ornament of the Essence, when it says, Gyaltsab Je, he says, bodhicitta is the wish for others' purpose to achieve manifest and complete enlightenment. He says, what is others' purpose? It is the nirvana in the minds of other sentient beings or other beings. So we generally take that to be just an illustration and not the only others' purpose. It's just the main point here. And we understand that when he says nirvana, he's talking about non-abiding nirvana. So it's fully enlightened Buddha's nirvana, not just placing beings in Hinayana nirvana. But anyway, this is, of course, when somebody is a bodhisattva, they wish to help beings in whatever way is suitable to them. So it's actually in some sense less a question of what someone actually meditates on, and just a question of specifically when in the Abhisamayalankara, when it's talking about others' purpose, what is Maitreya talking about with that phrase, others' purpose? And there's, as we see, there's not any real agreement within the text. But again, I think generally we accept that it could be what I said before, that it could be enlightenment, but viewed from many different angles. So when we see somebody who's suffering due to their miserliness, we wish that they may have the generosity of a Buddha, that they may perfect generosity. But in all cases, we're wishing for complete enlightenment for sentient beings. So then also there's this question of what does it mean, one's purpose and others' purpose? And so here, others' purpose, as I said, is talking about other beings' enlightenment. But it can be confusing because when we read these texts, they use these terms in different ways, in different contexts. So there are three main contexts we can look at. So one is in the context of the four bodies. So in the section towards the beginning of Perfection of Wisdom, we call it Jamjung in Tibetan, which is the Maitreya's text. But I think you might have studied this earlier on. You have this section very close to the beginning of both the Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's text and also Ornament of the Essence and Golden Garland. All of them have this part at the beginning where it says that Haribhadra is saying that that Maitreya, he prostrates at the beginning of the Abhisamayalankara. He expresses the expression of homage that for his own purpose and for others' purpose. And so another Tibetan scholar, Rongtong Shecha Kunrik, who was an opponent of Tsongkhapa, he says, well, that's not possible because the Buddha doesn't have a thought for one's own purpose, and Maitreya is a Buddha. Well, actually, he doesn't say Maitreya is a Buddha. That's one of the questions there. You might remember. It says then Gyaltsab Je analyzes that. Are you saying he doesn't have a thought for one's own purpose because he's a bodhisattva or because he's a Buddha? He says in either case, this is problematic. And what it essentially comes down to is that he thinks Rongtun is confusing the meaning of one's own purpose from two different contexts. So in the context of saying that Maitreya prostrates for his own purpose, it's not talking about a selfish purpose. It's talking about, we have the wisdom bodies, the two wisdom bodies, which means the wisdom body and the nature body, are the bodies for one's own purpose, in the sense that achieving those fulfills one's own, oneself becomes a perfected being, a fully awakened being. So that's one's own awakening. And then others' purpose are the two form bodies because they appear to sentient beings. So the wisdom body does not appear directly to sentient beings. So it's merely a private experience of the Buddha. So in that sense, it's the one's own purpose body. And the other's purpose are the two other bodies which appear to sentient beings, sense consciousnesses. So that's one meaning of the one's own purpose, other's purpose, is in terms of dividing the four bodies. But then here in the context of bodhicitta, then one's own purpose is one's own enlightenment. So actually it's all four bodies, but the ones that oneself will achieve. So we say that for the sake of all sentient beings, may I achieve enlightenment. This first part, for the sake of others, that's others' purpose, then achieve enlightenment is one's own purpose. So that's talking about one's own enlightenment. And others' purpose is others' enlightenment. So as I said, Gyaltsab Je says, nirvana in others' continuums. So it's just talking about one's own enlightenment, others' enlightenment. But still, they're both something that a bodhisattva has to wish to achieve. A bodhisattva has to recognize the importance of achieving one's own enlightenment. It's not that one should just abandon that because it's a selfish thought. That's not the idea here. But finally, in the context of mind training. So, for example, we see in the Lama Chopa, when it says, in short, childish beings work only for their own benefit and Buddhas work for the welfare of others, understanding the faults of one and the advantages of the other, please bless me to practice exchanging self with others. And likewise, in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, he says very similarly, in short, what is there need to say a lot? In short, the childish beings work only for their own benefit, and the Buddhas work only for the benefit of others. Look at the difference between the two of them. So here, one's own purpose is one's own short-sighted selfish needs, and others' purpose is the needs of others. So that in that case, then yes, Rongtipa is right, or Rongtun is right to say that Maitreya does not have the thought for one's own purpose, but he's mixing two different contexts, and that's what Gyaltsab Je is calling him on, in saying that you have to understand the meaning of one's own purpose in two different contexts. So that also leads into this next point here, very simply, faith is also a cause. So this is based on a quotation in the Lamrim Chenmo. You'll see that Tsongkhapa says that even if you wish to achieve the purpose of all sentient beings, if you haven't trained your mind to understand the qualities of a Buddha and wish to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, then while you can reverse the thought that mere self-liberation is inadequate for the sake of others, you won't reverse the thought that it's inadequate for one's own purpose. So what he means here is that, yes, you don't want to just abide in solitary nirvana because you want to be able to help others, but you don't see that there's some actual benefit in achieving some higher state that will benefit others more. So basically the point is that, sometimes it's said, and as we said in the last talk about the main cause of bodhicitta is compassion. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's not merely about having great compassion for beings and then wishing to achieve enlightenment in some very vague sense. We have to actually train our minds to have some idea of what enlightenment would entail. And that has to come from analysis of the nature of reality. What does it really mean? What is the nature of our minds and how can they be transformed? And is the realization of emptiness, first of all, we have to have some understanding of what emptiness is. And is that something that can actually transform the mind? So that has to be also a supporting cause, just as much as the thought, I want to benefit all sentient beings. We also actually have to analyze and see, is there such a state? Otherwise, of course, we want to help others, but maybe we should do something more concrete than try to achieve some spiritual state that we're not actually sure exists at all. So the next point is aspiring and engaging bodhicitta. So this is I think at the beginning we had the outline. So why don't we just actually switch back to that quickly so we can remember where we are. So the difficult points. So we just finished this point, object of observation, object of the mode of apprehension, and other's purpose. That was a very long point that we discussed, half of it last time and half of it this time. So now we have a few other points, aspiring and engaging bodhicitta, and then two simultaneous conceptions, shepherd-like bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So we'll cover those now. So the question is, what is the difference between aspiring and engaging bodhicitta? If you've read the commentaries, for example, Tenzin Gache's text, you'll see that he presents a number of different views of that. And if you happen to have read The Golden Garland by Tzong Khapa, you'll see that he actually presents it differently. And also in the Lama Rinpoche, there is some things that would contradict what Tenzin Gache is saying. So first of all, Tenzin Gache comes to a conclusion that engaging bodhicitta occurs when the wish to achieve enlightenment is directly conjoined with the practices of the bodhisattva. And then when they're not directly conjoined, that's as aspiring bodhicitta. So first of all, what does it mean to be directly conjoined? So generally what we understand that to mean is that both the conjoined, the conjoiner and what is conjoined with are both active consciousnesses or manifest consciousnesses. So for example, when somebody is meditating on emptiness, as I said before, then in our system, and at least in Sera Je's system, then the wish to achieve enlightenment is not manifest, the dormant mind or a subconscious mind. And so while it's still a functioning consciousness, it's not manifestly in the awareness of the person. So what does it mean to be a manifest mind? It's not actually seen in any of the texts that I've read, but we generally accept in debate that a manifest consciousness means that whatever appears to that consciousness appears to the person. Right? So at that particular time, that person has an experience of that. Whereas an unconscious, or we could say a dormant mind, that it's still functioning, but the person themselves is not aware of that. Now, what does that really mean? That's a deeper question, but practically speaking, that is how we talk. We could say that that some person has some particular very subtle wish that they're not even consciously thinking about, and they not even be aware that they have it, but it doesn't appear to them. Now, in this case, it's a little different. It's not that the person isn't even aware that they have bodhicitta. It's just not where their mind is directed at that moment. They can't always be thinking about that. They have to be focusing on emptiness when they're focusing on emptiness. So when both the wish to achieve enlightenment and the practice of the bodhisattva, for example, generosity, that's the standard example that's given, are both manifest at the same time, then they are directly conjoined, and that is engaging bodhicitta. Now, of course, this brings the question, does somebody have two consciousnesses functioning at the same time? That'll be the next subject. So then is it directly conjoined with the wish for the exalted knower of all aspects? So this is just, again, a question of a quotation. So you'll see in the Tenzin Gache's textbook that he gives the quotation from Ornament of the Essence by Gyaltsab Je, where he says, when the wish to achieve the exalted knower of all aspects is directly conjoined with the wish to practice generosity, that's engaging bodhicitta. So then it implies that you need to have the wish to achieve the exalted knower of all aspects. And we talked about earlier, well, somebody like a Vaibhashika bodhisattva doesn't even accept that. So does that mean they can't have engaging bodhicitta? So one way to answer that is saying that Gyaltsab Je is just giving an example. He's not actually giving a definition of what it means to be engaging bodhicitta. It's just one example of how it could function. So then can one person have both simultaneously? So this is the question I mentioned before that these people were debating me about. If you have aspiring and engaging bodhicitta, right? What if you first wish for the form body, and then later you come to understand the nature body, and then those become two different bodhicittas? Do they then merge into one? And then here we have these other two texts that I mentioned. So first of all, the Golden Garland by Tsongkhapa, it very explicitly says that after achieving engaging bodhisattva vows, which is bodhisattva vows, it's just an aside point, right? When we take bodhisattva vows, when we take the 18 root vows and the 46 secondary, that is engaging vows. Right? There's no such thing as a aspiring bodhisattva vow. We say it's a promise in the sense, I wish to achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings. But you haven't actually, either in front of a teacher or in front of an altar, pledged to engage in the activities of a bodhisattva. That isn't taking engaging vows. So Tsongkhapa says that once someone has taken an engaging vow, there's only engaging bodhicitta. So the answer that we give, as I said before, that our answers in debate are not necessarily what the person really thought. It's whether Tsongkhapa meant this when he wrote the Golden Garland, we can't really know, but we could examine the text carefully and say, does it really seem likely that is what he meant? Nevertheless, we try to make his text fit with our system rather than just dismissing it. So one possibility is that he was just talking about what was directly taught in the sutra. So what does that mean? In the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom, it talks about the 22 bodhicittas, from the earth-like bodhicitta up until the cloud-like bodhicitta. And so there, in the sutra itself, when it's talking about the first one, the earth-like bodhicitta, it does talk about aspiring bodhicitta. And then it talks about engaging vows, and then it talks about the engaging bodhicitta, starting with the gold-like bodhicitta, which is the second one. So Tsongkhapa is just presenting in the sutra when it says that this gold-like bodhicitta is engaging bodhicitta, that's where it's implying that after one has taken the vows, then they're all engaging bodhicitta, meaning the second through the 22nd of the 22 bodhicittas. So that's what some people answer. But then there's this counter debate. Well, then in that case, when we get to the 20th of the 22 bodhicittas, that's the bodhicitta like a pleasant sound. Now, if anybody remembers, when it's given the boundaries of where that bodhicitta functions, it's only at the final moment of the continuum of a sentient being, which is when a bodhisattva is in meditative equipoise. So according to Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's system, a bodhisattva in meditative equipoise should not have an engaging bodhicitta. So again, there seems to be some contradiction. If you make this answer that Tsongkhapa is talking about what's explicitly taught in sutra, well, the pleasant sound bodhicitta should by definition be only aspiring bodhicitta and not engaging bodhicitta. So anyway, one way to get out of that is to say that when it talks about the end of the continuum, then it's talking about not the very last moment when someone is in meditative equipoise, but the preparation for that. So when you get to chapter 7, if you, I don't think you've gotten there yet in the Abhisamaya in the Perfection of Wisdom studies, there is some understanding of that there is both the preparation for the final moment of the sentient being, which is when one has the appearance of all 173 aspects in one meditative session within one smallest moment of time, and then versus the actual meditation in emptiness, which is the actual the final moment of the sentient being. So these are very, we say, obscure, maybe splitting hair-like points, but when you debate, you try to make everything very exact and be very precise in your speech. And so if you're trying to line up these two texts, that would be one way to do it. The Lamrim Chenmo is quite different. And this is a probably more important point, that in the Lamrim Chenmo, it does say, after taking engaging bodhisattva vows, there is only engaging bodhicitta. This is because the Lamrim Chenmo is a prasangika text. It's not, here we're talking about the Savadhantrika system, which is Haribhadra's system, but the Lamrim Chenmo is based on the prasangika system. And in there, the engaging vows are form. This is because in the prasangika system, in general, vows are form. So when one takes monastic vows, that is a physical thing. What does that really mean? Well, this is based on the Abhidharma Kosha by Vasubandhu. So in that system, we say the lower Abhidharma as opposed to the higher Abhidharma, which is the Abhidharma Samachaya by Asanga. In Vasubandhu's system, it's very explicit in that text that monastic vows or pratimoksha vows are physical form. The meaning here is twofold. First of all, when you take the vow, you're speaking. That sound is form. But then subsequently, when the pratimoksha vows are they're form, but they are that which stops you from engaging in wrong actions of body and speech, which are form. So it's called non-revealing form. And what this means is that, for example, when you look at a person who's a monastic, even you can't know if they're a monastic. They could be a fake monastic. You can't tell by looking at them. You see that they're not engaging in actions like harming others or chasing after objects of attachment. But why aren't they doing that? You don't know the motivation behind it. All you see is that they're holding their body steadily and not engaging in certain actions. So that resistance to engaging in in negative actions, that is itself. Now in English, it sounds strange to say that's a vow, because in Tibetan anyway, the word is not vow, it's dompa, which means restraint. So that is a restraint. It's a restraint of their body and mind. Their body and speech. But you can't know that it's a pratimoksha vow or not, or pratimoksha restraint or not, because you don't actually know what's happening behind that. So in that sense, it's non-revealing form. The only time it reveals itself is when for example, when they first take the vow, when they speak, I pledge from now as long as I live not to engage in the act of killing. You can tell by their mannerism if they're really sincere, if they're crying when they say it, and they seem to have a lot of emotion, and it seems very sincere. It said that then it actually does reveal itself. Or for a monastic, when they attend the confession ceremony, the sojong ceremony, and they confess having done something, and it's very clear that they really have the intention to restrain from this, so they actually have that vow. It's not just something fake, that they're pretending to be a monk. So in those moments, then it becomes a revealing form, but usually it's non-revealing form. So when here in the Prasangika system, this was a question I had last year. I asked one of my teachers, because, well, where in the Prasangika text does it actually say anything about the vows being form? And the answer was basically this, that Chandrakirti, because this is what we base the Prasangika system on mainly, is his texts. We see that he follows the system of Abhidharma quite closely, of Abhidharma Kosha, of Vasubandhu, in most contexts, except when he sees something as being problematic. So, for example, he rejects the Vaibhashika system of what it means to be contaminated phenomenon. He gives a different definition of it, which is why the commentator on Chandrakirti, Jayananda, he actually took that for granted that Chandrakirti was following the Vasubandhu system, because he usually did, and therefore he made a mistake in his commentary. And so Khapa makes a very big point of that, because he said that's a very important error, that he misunderstood what Chandrakirti means by contaminated. But the background of that is that Chandrakirti in general, by default, would follow Vasubandhu's system. And thereby, by not negating that vows are form, it seems that he's actually just implicitly accepting it. Furthermore, another important point is that for Chandrakirti, it's possible that a physical form can have a result in many lifetimes. So for the Savadhandrika system, all of the karmas have to be carried by imprints on the consciousness. So the real thing that's creating karma has to be mental. Whereas in Chandrakirti's system, like in Vasubandhu's system, physical form can also be karma. Because the mode of how the action gives its result later has to do with what we call disintegratedness. That's a very subtle and difficult point, which I'm hoping we'll have an entire talk on that later in terms of Madhyamaka. So we've gotten a bit off the subject here, but this is quite important actually, in terms of understanding how the Prasangika understands what a vow, what a restraint is. And so that's why in Lamrim Chenmo we say that's why he says after engaging bodhisattva vows, then one only has engaging bodhicitta, because its physical form, a physical form does not become a non-manifest or dormant thing in the same way that a mind would. So it's always present, and therefore one always has the conjoiner, the practices of the bodhisattva in a manifest form. And thereby the bodhicitta is always engaging bodhicitta. So next we had, as I mentioned before, there's two simultaneous conceptions. This is a side issue. It's not directly related to bodhicitta, but it comes up when we ask, well, can somebody have both the thought to achieve enlightenment and the thought to practice generosity simultaneously, which it has to be if we're going to accept Chaitanya Chökyi Gyaltsen's understanding of what engaging bodhicitta is. So this is a point also that comes up again and again. You may have seen it in other contexts already. When the context of the preparation, for example, in the first chapter, it comes up. And when you talk about in Pramana, I don't know if you studied that yet, but that will come up and you'll see I have the quotation from it here. So there's a quotation from Sutra that's cited in this context where the Buddha says, a sentient being's continuum of consciousness is discrete. Right? So I have my consciousness, you have yours. These are two different singularities, or not singularities, but single streams. So it's taken to, at least by some people, to mean that one sentient being does not have two different minds functioning at once. Otherwise, it would be two sentient beings. But how we interpret the statement can vary because it's not entirely explicit like many of the statements from Sutra. Dharmakirti is quite explicit. Two thoughts do not engage at once. And it's important to understand the context of this. Dharmakirti is talking about he's arguing with the Nyaya, the Rinpoche school. The Nyaya school was a school of philosophy in ancient India, a Vedic school, and in their system, a sense consciousness was a conceptual experience. So Dhammakirti is arguing that if that was the case, then when you experience an external object with your eye consciousness, you experience color blue, or experience of form, then also you have the self-cognizer experiencing the eye consciousness. And so if those were both conceptual consciousnesses as they would accept it to be, because for them, not just sense consciousness, but any direct perceiver also is a conceptual consciousness. He says you would simultaneously be thinking, this is form, this is the mind perceiving form. Because you'd have the thought about the object you're seeing and the thought about the mind perceiving it. And he says that doesn't work. Two thoughts do not engage at once. He takes that as a tautology, that it's just understood. You can't simultaneously think, this is a form, this is an eye consciousness perceiving form. Maybe we can say for our own experience, does that ever happen? Do we ever have two thoughts occurring at once? Well, Chaitanya Chökyi Gyaltsen is seeming to say it does happen. So what does that mean? So Chaitanya Chökyi Gyaltsen says you cannot have two, when the Buddha says a sentient being's continuum of consciousness is discrete, he's saying that a very specific thing. Two manifest mental main minds of a similar type do not function simultaneously. So the similar type is the important point here. Two manifest mental main minds can in fact function simultaneously, but not of a similar type. But he doesn't say what a similar type means. but it's clear that he would then imply that the mind of generosity and the bodhicitta are not of a similar type, otherwise they couldn't function simultaneously. So some people take similar type to mean it has the same observed object and empowering condition, but contrary modes of apprehension. So for example, observing sound and thinking sound is permanent, and also observing sound and thinking sound is impermanent. You can't have both thoughts at once. They contradict each other. And they're both the same empowering condition because they're both mental consciousnesses. You can simultaneously have an eye consciousness and an ear consciousness and a mental consciousness. This actually, some people dispute that too, as you'll see in chapter 3 of Chandrakirti's text, and also it comes up in Madhyamaka in the section on the negating self-cognizers. But in general, most Buddhist schools accept that, of course, you can, as we can see clearly from our experience, you can hear and see at the same time, and you can think while you're looking at something. But you can't think two thoughts at once, perhaps, or at least two contradictory thoughts. It says, or the same mode of apprehension. So you simultaneously think this is a pot, this is a pot. There's no reason you'd have two different thoughts that are exactly the same at the same time. But the problem with this, except understanding of a similar type, is that it would render Dharmakirti's argument meaningless. Because Dharmakirti is saying you can't simultaneously think this is a form, this is a mind perceiving form. But those would, by this definition, be not a similar type. So there's no reason you couldn't have both at once. So Dharmakirti's argument would fail. And the first Dalai Lama, Galwa Gendendrup, he points that out. He says, if you accept that you can have two functioning mental consciousnesses at once, but it's not of the same type, well, if by that you mean two consciousnesses that have the same object, but perceive it in different ways, then Dharmakirti's argument becomes meaningless for the reasons I just explained. So we have here, this is form, and this is a mind observing form of a similar type. They shouldn't be by that first reason. So another way to understand similar type, which I think makes more sense, and which I hadn't actually come up with when we were answering many years ago about Bodhicitta. One of my teachers suggested this a couple of years ago. I think I first had an exposure to this way of understanding it, which seems to make more sense. I was very fortunate when we were going to all those damchas that were answering debates about Bodhicitta. So nobody pointed this out to me, so I guess unfortunate, you could say. I didn't learn, but also I didn't get caught in unable to answer. But now I would answer this way, that it similar force. So in Tibetan it's top sung, meaning similar force. So that what that means is that if I think this is form, this is a mind perceiving form or observing form, those thoughts both start at the same time. So they're of similar force. Whereas if I have a thought that's lingering for a long period of time, it's sort of at a not completely dormant level, but also not very strongly. Then that doesn't have to contradict having a second thought very strongly. So one of the examples that's given for how bodhicitta functions is like a mother who wants to buy medicine for her sick child. So she goes to the pharmacy and she is asking for the medicine, but at the same time, there's this thought in the back of her mind, I really hope I can save my child. That thought is strong enough that she doesn't just lose it, but it's not as strong as the manifest consciousness at the time thinking, I want to buy this medicine. Otherwise, it would distract her from what she's doing. But it's not totally gone from conscious awareness either, because it's over a long period of time. So likewise, a bodhisattva can have bodhicitta just lingering at a not completely dormant, but also not as strongly manifest level, but then at every particular moment be thinking, I want to practice generosity and so forth. And in this case, they're not of a similar type, but they're both two mental consciousnesses functioning at once. So then we have a question here, what consists of one thought? That's a very hard question, but basically it's one mind that thinks this is that. right? So in whatever way that might manifest. So it's not necessarily sound is impermanent, that would be one thing, but also I wish to achieve enlightenment. That's a kind of this is that in the sense of a copular, we'd say in English. This I wish to achieve enlightenment. It's connecting one subject with one object, or one, you could say, preposition with then one conclusion to that. So that's how thought functions. We could just say experientially. Now, do we just think pot without anything, or just impermanence? So like what we say, you have the subsequent, the inferential cognition of impermanence. Really, it has to be connected to something. You can't just realize impermanence in space. You think sound is impermanent or pot is impermanent. And by that, you can focus on impermanence. So there always has to be some kind of connection between two things. Yeah, so I wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of benefit of all sentient beings. Actually, that is two thoughts, right? It's really just, I wish to achieve enlightenment, that's one, and I wish to benefit all sentient beings, that's two. There's two different things going on there. So that's what I said earlier. Those are two thoughts that are separate. But again, what does that really mean? As I said, is it like two rivers that are substantially different things? Generally, yes, so Tenzin Gache is explicit. These are substantially different minds. But what does that really mean? You have some kind of mental energy that gets divided, like you have your physical body, and you have some number of atoms in your body that can be doing different things. Do you also have some limited number of mental events that can be occurring? It's really not clear. These are probably quite important questions, but it's very hard to use analogies from our ordinary experience, perhaps. Well, we can try our best. It's very good to try to debate them and see whether they make sense. So can a main mind realize that the foundational consciousness is selfless while the afflicted consciousness is functioning? This is a question from the Chittamatra system that comes up sometimes here, right? Because in the Chittamatra system, you have, for one thing, it would seem that in the Chittamatra system, any consciousness has to be manifest. There cannot be such thing as a dormant consciousness. Why? Because Asanga, for one of his 8 reasons that he gives for why there is a foundational consciousness, says that there has to be a foundational consciousness. Otherwise, there would be no consciousness when you sleep, and then your continuum of consciousness would be cut. Or when you enter into the equipoise on cessation. So that would imply that he doesn't accept any such thing as a dormant consciousness. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to argue that you have a foundational consciousness at that time to make up for there being no other consciousness. So in that sense, the afflicted consciousness, which is always functioning and always grasping that the foundational consciousness is a substantial self, if it's always functioning, always manifest, then when you realize that the foundational consciousness is selfless with your mental consciousness, don't you have two main minds of a similar type functioning simultaneously? One answer to that is that's why for the Chittamatra, the afflicted consciousness is not a mental mind. It's not the 6th kind of consciousness, like we have 5 sense consciousnesses and the 6th mental consciousness. It's a 7th one. And then they have the 8th, the foundational consciousness. They separate them so that you can say that they can function simultaneously and not obstruct each other. That's a different question you might come to later if you want to study about the Chittamatra system. Okay, so next we have this question of shepherd-like bodhicitta. So this is, you might know, there's a division into 3 kinds of bodhicitta. Tenzin Gache says it's in terms of the way it's generated, kitsulgigone, and then Tzong Khapa says it's divided in terms of the way that what one accepts to do, sheitsulgigone yewa. So that will be important as we distinguish what they are. I'll talk about that in a minute, but they are divided into 3. There's shepherd-like bodhicitta, ferryman-like bodhicitta, and king-like bodhicitta. So king-like bodhicitta is when you think, I will first achieve enlightenment, and then I'll liberate all beings. Ferry-like bodhicitta is thinking, I will ferry all beings together. We'll all arrive there together. And then shepherd-like bodhicitta is, I wish all beings to achieve enlightenment first, and I'll be the very last one. So what does that really mean? Because technically that can't happen. All of us agree in the sense of that all of the different schools here, they're not arguing, can you actually do that? Everyone agrees you can't do that. There's no way to liberate all beings if you yourself aren't liberated. It's like trying to teach somebody something that you don't know yourself. But then what does it mean to have that wish? So Chomten Rikrel, who was a previous Tibetan before Tsongkhapa, he says this cannot exist. This is a wrong consciousness. He just rejects it. Now, was he rejecting something that the Buddha spoke? Actually, it doesn't seem that there's any clear sutra source for this. It's hard to say exactly where this idea originated. Some people trace it back to Dolpilpa Sherlap Gyaltsen, the founder of the Dronangpa school. Tsongkhapa in the Golden Garland, he just says "che so," meaning it's said, but he doesn't say who said it. One time at one of the debates, public debates, one of my classmates asked somebody to open the debate. He said, Tsongkhapa says "che so," who said it? Well, the person doesn't know, and how are they supposed to know? But then they're supposed to say something because they're the one answering the debate. But when we had that at that time, there were some other people there present, some of the more advanced students in the Laramba class, and they presented a number of different sutra quotations that are said to maybe support it, but it's not explicit in the sutra by any means. There's this shepherd like Bodhicitta. So it's questionable where that comes from. So Chomden Rigrel, he negates it, he rejects it. But Tsongkhapa in the Golden Garland, he says Rigrel is wrong. And he says, because bodhisattvas have inconceivably creative ways of training their minds. But what does that mean? Is he saying they're just tricking themselves, or is he saying that it's actually that they have this wish? So essentially, in debate, we often come to this conclusion that it is a creative way of thinking that has to do with the way one generates bodhicitta. So that's why Jyotjen Gyaltsen says that this is division in terms of how bodhicitta is generated. It's not an actual division of the nature of bodhicitta. So they have the same, all three types of bodhicitta have the same observed objects and mode of apprehension. It's all bodhicitta in the sense that it's, I wish to achieve enlightenment for the sense of all sentient beings. The difference lies in how they are generated in terms of the motivation of the person while training his or her mind in preparation. So when somebody has bodhicitta, they have to understand, I need to achieve enlightenment first. Nobody's fooling themselves. It has to do with how they creatively imagine it as a way of enhancing their wish. They think how wonderful it would be if I could just be the last one. I feel such intense compassion for all sentient beings. I can't imagine wanting to be free of samsara before they are and leaving them all behind. So it's a way of training your mind, but you also aren't fooling yourself into thinking that that's actually possible. So when you actually have bodhicitta, yes, you understand, I need to achieve enlightenment. I need to take the steps to do that. But there's this underlying kind of, imagine wouldn't it be great if I could bring them all there first? And by that, it said that you do achieve enlightenment more quickly because it quickly undermines the self-cherishing attitude. So it's a creative way of training the mind. It's not actually something you come to through analysis and thinking this is how it actually is. Because as it says in the next one here, it is not possible to liberate others before attaining enlightenment oneself. So one's own enlightenment must be the goal. But in any case, as I said before, bodhicitta does not think I will liberate others. It is merely conjoined with that wish. So really, even king like bodhicitta is not actually thinking, I will achieve enlightenment first and then liberate others. Just thinking, I want to achieve enlightenment. But what makes it king-like or shepherd-like is about what other minds are conjoined with it, what other kind of meditations one does to support the bodhicitta. And then there's this very side point. I won't get into it because I realize I'm actually going longer than I expected. But we have, in terms of creative visualization, we have meditation on skeletons or meditation on totality. This question will come up for you when you study chapter 8 of Abhisamayalankara. But it's even then, it's not a major point. It's explicitly made, this point, in Gyaltsab Je's commentary to the Abhidhamma Sabachaya by Asanga. That commentary is not in English. Abhidhamma Samuccaya itself, I think, is in English. We have part of it here. But this also relates to, if you study chapter 2 of Dharmakirti's text on logic, the commentary on valid cognition, when there's a question of how you generate the Naljung Onsum, which is yogic direct perception. So this is actually a very interesting and important point. So the question here is, there's a distinction that's made by Tenzin Gache Gelsen in chapter 8 in his Prajnaparamita commentary, where he says that meditation on skeletons, which means, like, for the purpose of diminishing attachment, you imagine all sentient beings as skeletons, and you imagine all these skeletons appearing to your eye consciousness, and you actually have a vision of that based on the force of your meditation. But he says that's a mistaken appearance. Whereas the meditation on totality, which is a special kind of meditation that you'll find it also in the Pali Canon and also in the Vishuddhamarga, the path of purification by Buddha Gosha. He talks a lot about this, where you focus on a particular object, such as fire. So in the Pali, they call it the kashina. I would assume that's the same Sanskrit word. But anyway, you focus, for example, on fire until that experience pervades your experience within meditation, and you start to expand that. It's a way of developing both concentration and magical ability. So in that context, there's an appearance of all physical reality as fire. And Tenzin Gache Gelsen says that is not mistaken. So that's a distinction between these two. So what is the difference? It seems to be that in one context, in the meditation on skeletons, it's merely like a hallucination. Whereas in totality, you actually are transforming the external world based on transforming your own karma to experience something different. So there's a different way that it affects the mind. Now, what this has to do with yogic direct perception is, it would imply that you can, if by focusing on something for a very long time, you can have a direct experience of it, which has to do with how one eventually comes to a direct perception of emptiness. That by meditating on emptiness for a long time, it eventually becomes direct perception, which is what yogic direct perception is. So it's said that this can happen because the basis of the mind is stable, and because it's the nature of the mind that when you enhance any particular quality, it increases exponentially. And the two counterexamples that are given are water and jumping. So what that means is that you can't heat water indefinitely, because eventually it will boil off. You can't heat it to an infinite temperature. The mind is not like that. The mind is stable. It won't just evaporate by increasing the intensity of it. And then it's not like jumping, because if you jump, no matter how high you jump, if I can jump 5 feet in the air today, which nobody can actually, but if I could jump 5 feet in the air today, and I want to jump higher tomorrow, I'd have to start from the ground again, so I can get to 5 feet 1 inch. But I can't just start from 5 feet and jump to 10 feet. It's not how jumping works. You have to start from the ground every time you jump. Whereas the mind is not like that. If you could train your mind in compassion, then eventually what was once a stretch for you becomes the natural state of your mind. And you can start with that as a basis and increase that more. So it can just keep increasing and increasing and increasing. But the sort of the question here is, how does that become a direct perception? And is this a nature of the mind in general, or only to certain objects? So if I meditate on a skeleton, do I directly perceive, and eventually have a direct perception of a skeleton? Well, would that mean a skeleton just appears to me actually there, and there's a skeleton in front of me, and I can create a skeleton out of nothingness? Or does it mean that I hallucinate a skeleton? It does seem to be that it's more the second thing that Dharmakirti is talking about. And Gyaltsab Je, in his commentary on another text by Dharmakirti, ascertainment of valid cognition, he talks about this. He seems to be taking the position that it can happen with anything. Even if it's a wrong consciousness, you can eventually have a direct perception of it. No, it's not a direct, not in the sense of a ngonsum, we say in Tibetan, like where it's actually a correct direct perception, but a non-conceptual, let's say. And one of the examples is like if somebody is obsessed with a woman, one man is obsessed with a particular woman to the point that he starts dreaming about her and eventually starts hallucinating and seeing her in real life. Or anybody who has a mental imbalance and starts having hallucinations. What is the mechanism by which that happens? Yes, it's wrong, but how does it actually work that one can have a direct perception of something that's not there? It doesn't seem to be based on the eye consciousness. Where is the capacity for that within a sentient being? So that seems to be somehow related to how one eventually develops direct perception of emptiness. But I'll leave that here because we're already at the end of the time, and I have one more point here. So ultimate bodhicitta. In your study of bodhicitta, you'll have this presentation of ultimate bodhicitta, which is simply the direct perception of emptiness, but it's a little more complicated. So if you recall, the definition of ultimate bodhicitta that's given by Tenzin Gache is in Tibetan is Namking Ineluk Lanina Nupshing, which means that which has a vanishing dualistic appearance towards the final nature of an exalted knower of all aspects, which would imply that it's a direct perception of the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. So is it saying that's always the case? So if I have a direct perception of the emptiness of a pot, another object, does it have to be the Buddha's mind? Could it be anything? Could I just have direct perception of emptiness of any object that I choose, or does it necessarily have to be meditating on the Buddha's mind? So we have the first point here. Does it necessarily observe the exalted knower of all aspects and meditate on the emptiness of that? Well, the second question is, do all Arya Bodhisattvas have ultimate bodhicitta? And Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen says, yes. In the section on the 3 jewels of refuge, he says that all bodhisattvas are ultimate bodhisattvas, and he gives a quotation from Chandakirti. He says, therefore, they all have ultimate bodhicitta. In that case, we'd have to say that every single bodhisattva, in the very first moment of the path of seeing, is meditating on the emptiness of a Buddha's mind. So does that mean no bodhisattva can choose to meditate on the emptiness of a pot when they're on the path of preparation, about to become an Arya Bodhisattva? Or for this other example here, can an uninterrupted path not meditate on the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths or of the mind, something else other than a Buddha's consciousness? And actually, if I noticed, actually just saw this week that you do study as part of your supplementary study, Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's commentary on Tzong Khapa's Essence of Eloquence. In there, sort of towards the beginning, he says, this is in the context of the 3 natures, right? He says that the path of seeing this directly perceiving the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. He says if the truth of cessation, right, is as a consequence of somebody saying truth of cessation is an imputed nature, then when you're directly perceiving the emptiness of that, it wouldn't be a true emptiness. I'm missing a bit of a point here, but anyway, the main point that I'm trying to use this for is that he's implying that you can have a direct perception of the Four Noble Truths, the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. So you don't have to meditate on the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. So doesn't that contradict this whole idea of what ultimate bodhicitta is? And likewise, in his commentary on the Paths and Grounds by Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen, he has this point that if the definition of a ground was that which supports all qualities, then it absurdly follows that the bodhisattva meditating on the emptiness of a vase or a pot, that meditation would be the foundation of all qualities. But that can't happen because not all bodhisattvas meditate on the emptiness of avas to achieve the path of seeing. But he implies some of them do. And also he's implying that not all of them do. So it's not that, one person might say, well, the point is that the bodhisattva's path of seeing perceives the emptiness of all phenomena. And so it's both the emptiness of the Buddha's mind, the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths, and the emptiness of apat or avas. But it's clear that he's saying it's not necessarily that. So there seems to be a complete internal contradiction in his position. Likewise, in this section of the path of preparation, in Gyaltsab in Jetsun Jiggy Gyaltsen, he quotes Gyaltsab Je as saying that the path of preparation takes all apprehendeds and apprehenders together and meditates on the emptiness of them all, to negate somebody who says that you first generate the unit of calm abiding and special insight focused on the emptiness of apprehendeds, and later on the emptiness of apprehenders, because you're taking them all as your object. So it would imply that you perceive the emptiness of everything at the same time. But this contradicts other things. And of course, we also have the quotation from Sutra saying that the first ground bodhisattva, that they perceive Dharma Dhatu is all pervasive. And they say, see, the Dharma Dhatu here is equivalent with emptiness. So it's saying that they perceive everything as empty. So the solution that we generally come up with to this in debate is that, yes, the bodhisattva does not meditate on the emptiness of every single individual thing. However, they necessarily meditate on the emptiness of a Buddha's mind. And they necessarily meditate on the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. Why? Because those are their main objects of meditation. And so when Gyaltsab Je says that they combine all apprehendeds and apprehenders, he doesn't mean every single thing that exists, but he means all the things that they usually meditate on. So when a bodhisattva meditates on emptiness, they might use one object to kind of generate an experience of it, but once they get into their experience of emptiness, it's sort of pervading their understanding of everything as empty, in terms of everything they've already meditated on as empty, not every single thing, because they don't know every single thing. They haven't focused on every single individual thing. And that's why it would seem to be possible that bodhisattva can have a new apprehension of something as empty that they hadn't previously perceived as empty, because they just hadn't thought of that particular object. But in terms of the main things, no bodhisattva is not going to be meditating on the Four Noble Truths, or not meditating on the Buddha's mind. So those are the objects that they take and perceive them as empty. Now, there's this last point here. Is there a difference in the bodhisattva grounds in terms of how much they see the wisdom body? That's just a question that will come up when you get to Madhyamaka. But also you may have seen that when you were studying in the section Yandakta in Perfection of Wisdom, which I think is translated in your text as the perfect end. Although I think like Gareth Sparham translates it as the reality limit. But in any case, in that section, Gyaltsab Je, the Ornament of the Essence, he says that if in systems where the truth of cessation is an ultimate truth, then it makes sense to say that there's a difference between how much a bodhisattva sees the wisdom body. But in this system of Haribhadra, where the truth of cessation is not an ultimate truth, then you can't talk about that. But what does that even mean? It does seem to mean that when he says the wisdom body, he's talking about the bodhisattva directly perceiving the truth of cessation in the mind of a Buddha. And they see a greater and greater piece of that, because what they're essentially seeing is emptiness. And then they're seeing the emptiness free of more and more obscurations. That's a subtle point they'll get into in Madhyamaka. I don't have time anyway now to talk about it now. We're already later than I expected. But it's related here with this issue of what exactly does it mean for a bodhisattva to have this absorption into the emptiness of all phenomena. So then I added this one more slide here, so you won't have this in the translation. I just added it, thinking it would be interesting here. There's this stanza from Ardeyadeva. So he says, whoever views a single thing is said to be a viewer of all. What is the emptiness of one? That is the emptiness of all. So that this question comes up here. And actually, I think in Ornament of the Essence, Gyaltsab Je also quotes this near this not in this exact context, but in the section, maybe on the three refuges. But in any case, the point is, does a bodhisattva necessarily see the emptiness of all? What does that really mean? And one of my teachers, who I think some of you know in Italy, Geshe Ngawang Sangye, he said this is very important for understanding what it really means, why somebody would become omniscient. Because in emptiness, everything is one nature. The emptiness of a vase and the emptiness of a pillar are not substantially different, or not even, we say, two different entities. Even though the pot and the vase are, so the vase and the pillar are. So if the emptiness of all things is in one nature, and you perceive that all simultaneously, when you become a Buddha, you can now perceive conventional phenomena and ultimate phenomena simultaneously. So when you're perceiving the emptiness of all things, you can also see the bases of those emptinesses. And so all those things appear to you at the same time, because they're all merged in emptiness. So this has to do with how the Bodhisattva eventually achieves omniscience. It's a bit obscure. I don't claim to really understand it either, but it's sort of relevant in this context. So with that, I think it's good I finish. And I was thinking possibly to go back over a lot of the points again, but since it's already, I think, only 20 minutes left, it's good we leave time now for question and answer. So if anyone would like to ask, please go ahead. I'll turn off the screen share here.
Hello, Venerable Gache. There's something that I've been wondering about in relation to how was it with Bodhicitta? So in terms of the objects, does it make any difference if the person who has this Bodhicitta in the mind would accept 3 final vehicles or just 1 final vehicle? Because yeah, they couldn't wish enlightenment for all sentient beings if they don't believe everybody can attain that. I don't know if there's anything that can be said about that. I was just wondering.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I don't remember us ever debating about that. But that is a good point. You could have, for example, a mind-only proponent who's a bodhisattva, and they don't accept that all sentient beings can achieve enlightenment. And actually, it would seem in their system, they might even accept that there are beings who have the cut-off lineage, meaning they can't even achieve liberation from samsara. So what would that really mean in terms of their bodhicitta? I suppose it would be similar to what we said about for example, the bodhisattvas who don't realize emptiness, who don't really understand what enlightenment is or how to achieve it, but it's just a kind of an emotional wish. It's generally understood that that can't last beyond the small path of preparation. Once somebody small path of accumulation. Once somebody has achieved the middling path of accumulation, they necessarily must become a madhyamaka and have realized emptiness. So maybe at the beginning, somebody could have that kind of wish. They could think, for all sentient beings, and not necessarily every single one without exception, may I achieve enlightenment. Or maybe at least that they all are free of samsara, even if it's not that they all achieve enlightenment. So that in that sense, they don't understand bodhicitta in the same way as the madhyamaka would, but nevertheless, they have that wish based on more on an emotional rather than analysis. But that's a good point, and I'll have to think about that more, because that does seem to be problematic in terms of saying that it has to be the nirvana in the continuums of others, meaning others' enlightenment. So yeah, that may fit more with Tenzin Gache saying that wishing simply that all sentient beings achieve a realization of emptiness, that fits within the other's purpose here. So it doesn't necessarily have to be complete enlightenment. But yeah, thank you for that. Well, I'll have to think about that more.
Thank you. And maybe just would those, so if their final goal is like the hearers, yeah, I mean, one of the hearers, they don't have Buddha bodies, right? So they wouldn't, none of them would have any of the Buddha bodies. I mean, those, like the hearers and solitary realizers, if that's their final goal.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying before, that they might just, even just the very simple thing of seeing Shakyamuni Buddha and wishing I'd like to be like him. And we achieve that state. So in that sense, they don't have to divide into these different kinds of bodies of the Buddha. They just have whatever for them they understand as enlightenment. They wish to achieve that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Venerable Gache.
Hello?
Hello. Thank you. Could you say something about the significance of the order of the six perfections? Why it's generosity, ethics, patience? I know we have to practice all six, but why in this specific order?
In that particular order, for one thing, it has to do with difficulty, right? It said that they're progressively more difficult to practice. So by practicing generosity, that's the easiest one, and then it gets progressively more difficult to wisdom. So that's the reason for the order. So it's not that necessarily you practice one, and you certainly don't perfect one and then later start the next one, right? But it's just presented in that order in terms of level of difficulty. And then also, so like the reason for when we practice, like you'll read about this when you study the first chapter of Chandrakirti's text. So he talks about, when you practice generosity, you then lay the foundation for further practice, because with generosity, you're laying the foundation to be to have requisites in the future, have the conditions conducive for further practice. Then with ethical discipline, you're building the foundation for then having a positive rebirth in which you can implement those practices and make use of those requisites you have. And then with patience, you stop yourself from destroying your roots of virtue. So you've already been creating roots of virtue through your practice of generosity and ethical discipline, but with anger, you could destroy them. So you then have patience to help you to stop that from happening. And then next with the effort one, the diligence or joyous effort, then you enhance that such that it becomes even stronger. Although sometimes it's understood that that's really meant to pervade all of them, right? So it's not exactly necessarily at that point. The joyous effort is sort of has to be applied at all times. But then certainly with the concentration and wisdom, it's that once you've accumulated enough merit through the first practices, then you can start to generate real concentration. Otherwise, it's very hard to just generate that at the beginning. And on that basis, then you can generate wisdom and insight. But of course, they're also practiced in conjunction. That's why it says that you have the achieving through armor. It's that the Bodhisattva conjoins all of them. So really, it's not that they're literally, as I said, in that order. You don't perfect one and do the next. But at the same time, it's just presented that way to understand in general what is progressively more difficult and which ones to focus on, at least at different times.
Hello, Tenzin Gache, thank you very much. Bodhicitta is the antidote for the self-chasing thought. So my question is, when the self-chasing thought is abandoned during the path, according to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, bodhicitta, the great compassion is going to be the antidote to the self-cherishing thought. And then bodhicitta is then based on that great compassion. But really, more explicitly, it's presented usually as great compassion. So first of all, it's manifestly abandoned as soon as one has great compassion. This thought, I will achieve personal enlightenment just for my own, personal liberation. That's the obstacle. That's what we call considering that it's sufficient just for one's own, for others' purpose to achieve solitary peace, and that is negated by great compassion. But still, that the imprints of that can be there, so you don't manifestly have that thought and act on that thought as a bodhisattva, but it can still influence at a subtler level. So generally, it's understood that finally the stains of that disappear at the 8th bodhisattva ground. That's why in the Uttara Tantra, it says that it's like the child being born out of the womb, that the stains of the womb are still there up until the bodhisattva, the 8th ground, and then when the bodhisattva is fully fledged, they are no longer polluted by that. The stains of the because the womb is understood here to be like a foul place, that it smells bad or whatever. So then when they're born out of that, then they're free of that, and they are then fully fledged in that they no longer have even the subtle stains of cherishing others, such that they're not going to even at a subtle level act out of self-interest.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, Venerable Gache.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I still hold a lot of doubts about having just one object of the mind and how that works. And so when we talk about observing the 173 aspects, the analogy is used of standing on a mountaintop looking down at a valley.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the valley would have many, many different things in it. And maybe it's one object because it's a collection. But you could also say there's 173 different things within that collection. How does that work?
Yeah, I think it's sort of that. That one argument would be that is an example of having many different minds at once, whereas one is more powerful. So that's why we say that the meaning of the similar type is two minds that have the same power. So only one of them is most powerful. The other ones are slightly more dormant, but not completely dormant. But one other way to understand it would be like when you have an eye consciousness, you're focused on one object, but as you say, the other ones are kind of there on the periphery of that. So whether that means that it's one mind that has those as their peripheral objects, which would be hard to understand exactly in terms of a mental consciousness, because a mental consciousness is not a collective engager that in the way that a sense consciousness is. A mental consciousness engages by elimination, so it's just focusing on one thing. So it really would have to be 173 different minds. And so maybe it is the case that some of them are more dormant than others, not that are all completely dormant. And so they are kind of there on the periphery of consciousness, that the person has many different minds. And there's no reason that should be a problem, at least in Jigchen Chukyi Gyaltsen's system. It would be problematic perhaps for the systems that say there are not such a thing as two consciousnesses functioning at once. But if you can have two, there's no reason you can't have 173, which actually would seem to make sense from our experience, perhaps. When somebody, for example, is a teacher and they're very caring about their students, at some level of their mind, they're always aware of all the different students and their individual needs. They don't have to be actively focused on every one of them every time. It's just too much for the mind, but they're attentive enough that as soon as they say something that they know might affect one student in one way, they're aware of that. They're kind of peripherally aware of that, such that it affects how they teach and what might be beneficial for that person. So it does seem that the mind is capable of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I have there's a one on the chat here. In this context, why cannot the one thing a mind is focusing on be a set of things Hence, it is still focusing on one. What defines one thing? Well, that's a different question, right? So if I think, this is a pot and a pillar, right? Or this is a group of people. Is that one object or two objects? Well, the observed object is two, but it's not focusing on two in two modes of apprehension. So one is not simultaneously thinking a pot is both permanent and impermanent, right? It can only have one mode. A mental consciousness, or sorry, a conceptual consciousness can only have one mode of apprehension. It can only have one meaning generality. It's by definition one conceptual consciousness cannot have too many generalities at the same time. In which case it can't think this is this and that, but it can think this and this and this are that. That would be no problem. But then, well, one of the problems that does come up is when you think a pot and a pillar, what is the engaged object, right? So I said, if you're thinking impermanence, really what you're thinking is, for example, sound is impermanence. You're not just thinking of impermanence in space. But what are you thinking of when pot and pillar have to be the engaged object, the object of the mode of apprehension? Are you thinking something is a pot and a pillar, but that's impossible. So that actually is a bit of an unresolved issue that we get to in Dharmakirti system. Nevertheless, yeah, so you say, what does it mean to be one thing? It really has to, it's the short answer was it's one mode of apprehension. It doesn't have to be one single observed object.
So it seems that there are no more questions here in the room, in the Gompa. So thank you very much for the talk on Bodhicitta. So maybe we can finish here, and if we can dedicate the merits that we have accumulated together.
Yes, so thank you all. So as I said, I had thought it would take a little less time to complete these final subjects, and so I had thought maybe to go over all of the points again and talk about more how it's relatable to our own experience. I can either do that at a later time, or maybe it's implicit. It requires a little bit of creativity. I think some of them, at least, I made explicit, how it really does relate to our experience. And I think the question that came last time, which was quite a good question, is how is this really relatable? Is it just splitting hairs, or is it actually something relevant? And what we learn in debate anyway is not to worry so much about that. Otherwise, the debate loses its kind of game element of it, right? But debate in a lot of ways is like playing a sport. And so you just get into the zone of what you're doing, and you don't worry too much about what it means. You're just worried about playing the game. But over time, it has, for one thing, the obvious benefit of increasing your mental capacity. You can think about a lot of different things very quickly, analyze them, keep a lot of things in memory, in active memory, and remember what somebody's saying and follow a train of argument, no matter what you're arguing about. Secondly, you get very familiar with these different terms and what they are and aren't. So it's like normal language. Things that were once very difficult philosophical concepts become like your ordinary language in talking about ordinary everyday things that you experience. So it's a lot easier to manipulate them and think about them. So that when you do sit down and contemplate them and think, what does this really all mean? It's all right there for you, and you have something. You don't have to keep referring back to a book, and I missed this point, I don't remember what that means. You have it all quite fluently in your mind. So there's definitely, I've noticed that benefit. You know, we're studying science again, for example, now, which I haven't studied since I was in high school and college many years ago now. And I think that the way I approach it is very different than how I did when I was younger. I am much more, you know, maybe it's just being older, but it's much easier to think about what is the real consequence of this, and what is the questions that are come out of this, and be very precise about that. So I think that at least to some extent must come from, you know, going through this system for so long. Now I can't say that it necessarily means that you have this realization of these things. You know, as I think I said last time, I'll have to see in the future once I actually do have the time to do a little bit more meditation. We don't get a lot of space for that here. Nevertheless, there is something quite profound going on, and as I've always felt being at Sera, this is how it is. So rather than trying to fight it, I might as well just try it out and see, and then report to you all later, so then you know. And then if it doesn't work for me, I can tell you so you don't make the same mistake. But I'll have to see for myself whether it actually does lead to these kind of realizations that they're talking about. And I think that's part of the spirit of the inquiry here, that we start to realize we don't really know. No, very few people perhaps really know, or no, maybe nobody does, because maybe it, you know, as we say, maybe it doesn't actually work. But we see some people that it does seem to work. We see His Holiness the Dalai Lama and others where there really does seem to be something profound coming out of this. How they get there, we're not entirely sure. But over the years, we get more and more skeptical of this very simple answers about it, and very simplistic ideas of what is enlightenment. That it's a bit much, isn't it, to say, I want to have a mind that's completely omniscient and knows every single thing perfectly, such that I can benefit all sentient beings. It might sound very normal to us after we repeat it a long time, but when we step back and think about it, it's quite shocking. And it's useful to think about all the different consequences of that. Why is it shocking? Well, it's not just a generality of shocking, but it's what are the specific consequences that it would contradict? What things do we know about reality that would make that impossible? And then we have to question, well, are those things that we know, is it based on actual knowledge or just based on assumption? So that's something at least we start to do here. And I found that a very useful exercise outside of the context of debate, and sometimes occasionally within the debate itself. So I hope this is helpful and beneficial for you, and will continue. Yeah, I've been informed that unfortunately my dear friend Dan, who is lived in our house here for 10 years, and it was very nice to have him around, because his intense questioning and intelligence really benefited all of us. So it's unfortunate, it sounds like, that he's not going to be able to give the next talk, so they've asked that I do instead. So actually, from my side, I'm really happy to be able to talk on the Four Noble Truths. I was a little bit jealous that Dan was doing it. So I've started today actually reading up a bit and trying to prepare. So I hope to see you all then. And then I think after that, we'll have to see as time goes on. Maybe that Four Noble Truths will end up taking 2 sessions as well. It very well might. So let's just see. And then as the sessions go on, I think we'll pick and choose as what are the most important points that haven't been covered, and whatever ones we're able to do, we can do. So thank you very much. And yes, also let's dedicate all the merit for the flourishing of both the Istituto Lama Tzong Khapa and your study program, and for the FPMT in general, and of course for all sentient beings, and for our teachers, and the swift return of Gyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche to this world, and of course for any sponsors and other people who have worked very hard to put all of these talks together. They may have their wishes fulfilled in accordance with the Dharma. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Venerable Gache.
Thank you very much, Venerable Gache.
Thank you so much, Venerable Gache.
Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Venerable.